Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
We've got something really fascinating to unpack today. We're going way back. Forget the later stuff you might picture, shoguns, big famous battles. We're looking at the very, very beginning.
That's right. The origins of the samurai class in Japan.
How do they even start?
Exactly. I mean, it's not like they just popped up overnight, right?
Yeah.
Fully formed warriors.
Bro.
This was a long process, really shaped by some specific historical forces. We're digging into the societal pressures, the economic shifts, the conflicts that actually created this military group.
And our map for this deep dive, it comes from excerpts of an article called How the Samurai Emerged.
A very useful source for this.
Yeah. And our mission really is to peel back the layers of this source. Find those crucial turning points, maybe some surprising influences that forged the samurai. Get past the myth, get into the making of it all.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The name itself, samurai. What does that actually tell us about who they were?
Well, the name is pretty revealing, actually. In Old Japanese, samurai literally means something like to serve a high-ranking person.
Wow.
Or to protect the master, to serve the master. Service is just fundamental right there in the word.
Service. Okay, that's powerful. And what about the characters the hieroglyphs used?
Right, there's more there too. You've got ji, which was borrowed from Chinese, and originally that referred to people guarding Buddhist temples.
Oh, interesting. Temples.
Yeah, early on. And then there's bushi, which is simpler, just means a warrior, a fighter.
So even in the words used way back then, you see this mix.
You really do. It's not just about fighting ability. It's martial skill in service to someone else. And maybe early on, even connected to religious places, it highlights that functional role they filled from the start.
So less like independent knights running around, more defined by who they served, who they protected.
Initially, yes. That seems to be the core idea.
And the article places their origins, as a distinct class anyway, surprisingly early. We're talking 7th, 8th centuries.
That's the period, yeah. During the reign of Emperor Kotoku, his reforms were a huge catalyst.
Reforms? What kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, these reforms really led to the development of feudalism in Japan. They concentrated land ownership in the hands of, large landowners, big estates.
Okay, big political shift. But what did that mean for the average person, the farmer? I imagine that wasn't necessarily good news.
No, definitely not. It was pretty brutal, actually. Peasants started losing their traditional land rights.
Oh, wow.
And on top of that, they got hit with really heavy taxes.
So squeeze from both sides.
Exactly. And you can imagine the result of widespread discontent, frustration.
Leading to,
as the source points out, increasingly frequent peasant revolts. People were pushed too far.
And some didn't just revolt, did they? The article mentions they sometimes just left.
That's right. Many fled their lands entirely. They became what were known as ronins.
Ronins, what does that name mean?
The term itself is quite stark. It literally translates to vagrants, people adrift, outside the system, no land, no master.
Vagrants. Rootless people. That sounds like a tough existence. What did a ronin even do back then to survive?
It was definitely precarious. Some, they banded together, formed gangs, robbed travelers, even attacked those wealthy feudal estates they'd maybe fled from.
Taking it back, in a way.
Sort of. But here's where it gets really interesting for the samurai story. Others started to offer their fighting skills, their services, to those very same feudal lords.
Wait, so the lords creating the problem ended up hiring the people displaced by the problem?
Kind of ironic, isn't it? But yes. And this leads right into a critical shift the article talks about, the military needs of those lords.
How so?
Well, the feudal lords, they became increasingly scared of arming the very peasants they were exploiting.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You don't hand weapons to people who might use them against you.
Precisely. And this fear actually culminated in a major decree in 792, peasant military service. Officially abolished. Gone.
No more peasant levies. But the lords still needed protection, right? They had land, wealth.
They absolutely did. Protection from bandits, from those ongoing revolts we mentioned, and importantly, from each other. Rival lords.
Right, so a security vacuum.
A big one. And the source points out that it was in this climate that the lords increasingly and willingly started to hire those ronins.
The vagrant.
The vagrants, the landless fighters, to fill that security need. And this was a fundamental step, really, in creating a military class that wasn't tied to farming. They were becoming professional, non-producing guards.
Okay, so that's the Ronin connection. Then by the 10th century, the article says things evolved further.
Yes, the situation changed again. Now you have smaller landowners facing their own
You
problems.
weren't powerful enough on their own.
Exactly. They couldn't really defend themselves against pressure from the administration or those peasant gangs still around, or even their bigger, more powerful neighbors. They just didn't have the resources, the scale.
So they needed protectors, too, like
Ugh.
bigger lords.
They did. And their solution, become vassals. They pledged loyalty and service to the bigger feudal lords in exchange for protection.
And the service they pledged, that was military service.
That was the core of it, forming armed units for their new suzerains, their patrons.
Ah, okay. And these guys, these militiamen serving the bigger lords, they became a different kind of samurai.
That's how the source puts it, yeah. They evolved into this new type of samurai described specifically as armed servants.
Armed servants. There's that service idea again.
It keeps coming back. It reinforces that core identity service tied to fighting skill.
And how were these armed servants paid? Was it different from before?
It was. For their loyalty, they got housing, food, basic necessities covered. But significantly, sometimes they received actual land plots.
Land. So they became landowners themselves.
Sorta, but with a twist. Crucially, these were often plots with peasant farms already on them.
Oh, I see. So they weren't farming it themselves.
No. It was more like being granted an estate to manage, drawing income from the peasants working it. This further cemented their role as separate from agriculture, as a non-producing class supported by the land.
Okay, that clarifies things. Now, the article brings up another major influence, and this one feels a bit unexpected. A long war.
Yes, a really significant conflict happening in the northeast of Japan, the war with the Ainu people.
The Ainu. They're the indigenous people of Japan, right? Descendants of the oldest inhabitants.
That's right. And these border areas in the northeast, they were rough, less controlled by the central government.
Frontier territory.
Exactly. And they attracted bold people, including many of those runaway peasants looking for new land, new opportunities outside the established system.
So you have these tough, independent-minded settlers on a really volatile frontier.
Precisely. And they naturally grouped together, formed their own detachments for protection. They had to stay constantly alert.
Makes sense. And how did the government react to this?
Well, this is fascinating. Instead of just sending out traditional armies periodically, which was maybe inefficient, they actually started encouraging landless peasants to resettle up there in the north. And critically, the government armed them.
Hang on. Didn't they just abolish peasant military service elsewhere because they were afraid?
They did. But here, the calculation was different.
Why? What was the thinking?
Strategy and efficiency. These armed settlers, already living there, defending their own new homes and families, turned out to be much more effective against the Ainu than military expeditions sent from the capital.
Ah, a permanent, motivated local force.
Exactly. They developed the right skills, the right tactics for that specific kind of frontier warfare.
So the Ainu War wasn't just a place where samurai eventually fought. It was like a breeding ground, a crucible where a certain kind of armed settler class emerged, feeding into the whole samurai phenomenon.
It seems to have been a really important factor, yes. And the source points to an even deeper influence from this conflict. Something quite profound, actually.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it? This is where it's really interesting.
Yeah, this detail is striking. The source states flat out that the long war with the Ainu influenced fundamental samurai traditions.
Okay, like what?
Specifically, it mentions that the samurai adopted the rite of harakiri from the Ainu people.
Wait, harakiri, ritual suicide. The thing most associated with samurai culture came from the Ainu, the people they were fighting against.
That's what this source suggests. It's pretty startling, isn't it?
Startling is an understatement. Wow.
It's a powerful reminder, I think, that cultures in conflict don't just clash. They interact, they exchange things, they adopt practices, even really profound ones, sometimes from their adversaries.
It completely challenges that idea of samurai culture developing purely internally, in isolation.
Absolutely. It shows potential external influences shaping even their most core, iconic traditions.
That is a real aha moment. Okay, so the samurai class wasn't just shaped by Japanese politics and economics internally, but also by this external conflict, this cultural exchange on the frontier.
It seems that way, based on this source. And it all leads, the article says, to the 12th century.
What happened then?
By then, with ongoing feudal fragmentation lords, fighting lords, internecine wars, constant power struggles, the samurai finally consolidated. They became a distinct, powerful, and really indispensable military class across Japan.
Okay, So let's try and weave all these threads together. We've got the initial meaning of service, the impact of Kotoku's reforms, creating feudalism.
The rise of the ronin from displaced peasants, the shift in military needs when lords stopped arming peasants.
The evolution of smaller landowners into these armed servants, receiving land with farms.
And then this crucial, maybe surprising influence of the Ainu War, not just tactically but culturally, with the harakiri connection.
So pulling it all back, what does this complex origin story mean for us, for how you listening should understand the samurai?
I think it means seeing their emergence not as some single clean event, but as something, well, messier, more complex.
Right.
The source shows they were forged from multiple pressures at once. You had the breakdown of the old order, the practical needs created by peasant unrest and land issues, and direct cultural influence from external conflicts like the Ainu War. It's a very human, very multifaceted process.
So why is understanding how they emerged from these specific, often difficult circumstances so important for you, the listener, to grasp?
Because it moves us away from maybe a static, sometimes romanticized image.
Yeah.
It shows a dynamic class born out of real-world necessity, social upheaval, struggle, and adaptation over a long time. They weren't just born samurai, they were made samurai by the turbulent world they lived in, shaped by everything from tax policy to frontier warfare.
Okay, and that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into the samurai's beginnings.
It's been fascinating to trace it.
Absolutely. We went from the meaning hidden in their name, through the impact of those feudal reforms, the crucial role of runaway peasants, the ronin,
the changing military landscape, the evolution of vassalage and service, and that really profound influence from the conflict with the Ainu people.
especially that detail about harakiri.
Definitely a key takeaway. It underlines how intertwined and complex these origins really were. The sources reveal the samurai class grew out of necessity, social chaos, economic shifts, and conflict, evolving over centuries before they became the figures we often picture.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on, something rooted right in the material we looked at. The article specifically suggests the samurai adopted harakiri from the Ainu. If that's true, if this iconic symbol of Japanese warrior culture has roots in the very people they fought, what does that suggest about where traditions truly come from?
Yeah.
How many other iconic cultural elements in any society might have unexpected origins? Maybe roots in surprising exchanges, even with perceived outsiders or adversaries.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About how cultures really interact and borrow, even in conflict.
Definitely something to ponder as you explore more history.